All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 4 of the Collegiate Esports Experience. We have gotten in a rhythm here, haven't we?
Yeah, we're doing pretty good.
I'm proud of us. All right? We've got big things coming here for episode 4. We're really excited. We've got another special guest coming at you. I will turn it to Tanner now to introduce our guest.
Absolutely. Yep. So this week we've got Michael from NACE. And Michael, I don't want to highlight you too specifically, so go ahead, take it away, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I am terrible at introducing myself, but I'll try to do my best here.
We are too. It's fine.
Yeah, I guess I am technically one of the old guys of Collegiate Esports at this point in time. I'm one of the founders. I say that because we had 6 starting, chapter members who formed the National Association of Collegiate Esports back in 2016, which technically isn't so far long ago,
It
but
kind of feels ancient.
It feels,
yeah.
Oh yeah, it feels like I'm talking about the ancient times when I say it
The
in
before
our world,
times.
right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's funny, you get the same idea and message from anyone else you talk about and there's only a handful of us who were around in 2016, but it's the same thoughts, like, wow, yeah, that was before we had clocks and machines and people are still learning how to read and write. That's like how we kind of refer to it tone wise. But I'm the executive director for the National Association of Collegiate Esports. In short, we just call it NACE. And it is the largest collegiate esports organization in North America. It is made up of varsity esport programs at colleges and universities. And we also run our league, NACE Star League, which is coincidentally the largest collegiate esports league in the world, which is I always find interesting because we only operate in the United States and Canada, in North America collectively, right? But we're the largest collegiate esports league in the world. That's what we run, and we've got over actually pull it up and I'll tell you exactly, but we are over 800 colleges and universities as of yesterday.
Wow. Really? I did not. I know the number has grown, and obviously I'm with you. I'm an older person in this industry at this point, right? And I'm remembering back to 2019, and you remember just ballpark where you were at in 2019 in terms of member institutions? Because I would not have guessed 800 now. That's huge.
Trying to recall off the top of my head, I think we were somewhere around 40 to 50, somewhere around there feels about right. Yeah. I have a chart because I share every year kind of where the growth of collegiate esports has been that I share at our national convention every year. And it's just a chart. It's nothing fancy or special, but just because people generally have a curiosity of where is this? Where did it come from? Yeah. How fast are we growing? And the answer is really, really fast.
The leap has been awesome to see for sure, and certainly necessary for this.
Oh. Absolutely.
Yeah. Especially, well, for any listener who's listening to this, college esports is booming, right? Like, we're powering forward collectively. And I think that's what marks us very different than all other segments of the esports industry. Is higher education is very integrated. It's networked together. It's not like athletics where the best day I could have is the school next door burns to the ground. It is not anywhere near that. It is, and coming from traditional athletics, that was my previous life before esports. It's kind of a breath of fresh air. It's very collaborative. Everyone, I think, fundamentally understands that my success is predicated upon you being successful too, because we're trying to build something that means something.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, we touched on that last week just a little bit on how willing other programs and schools are willing to collaborate with new programs, and we see I see that in NACE, especially in the mentor program. Or if I put a question in Discord, there's 30 people that respond almost instantly. So there's definitely a lot more collaboration.
I think that's rightfully so too. I don't get me wrong. Just as you mentioned, Michael, coming from a traditional sports background, I love competition, right? I love we got to be better than these people and all those things. But I think when you're at a place like higher education, right, the ultimate goal is to serve your students, whether that's in the game that they're competing in, their career development, whatever your metrics or your intended outcomes are. With something like that, it's so much more beneficial for your institution and the one next to you and the student body in general when we're collaborative, like the way that Collegiate Esports is. And so I think that that's really, really powerful and empowering to see.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to say this about. I think I can say this about myself. I can certainly say it about my team and our elected leaders, which for anyone who doesn't know, I generally assume people know things that no rational person would probably know. But for those who don't know, NACE is a 501c3 membership association. Okay, that's a technical term. What does that actually mean? It means that we are ran entirely by our member institutions. Our members, they vote for their leaders. We've got 5 different leadership bodies: the board of directors, competition council, eligibility enforcement committee, student development council, and student representative program. And those are all, for the most part, elected by their peers. Some are appointed by, like, the board will appoint members to the EC, right? But those are made of nominations from member schools. Our leadership is entirely made up of esport coaches and esport directors across the entirety of the board, who controls every single aspect of the association: our budgets, our staffing, what esport titles we're doing, the structure of competition, who we're working with, what we're developing. Complete 100% control and direction, which I think is a very powerful thing. It also is a little hectic sometimes when you have
Absolutely.
so many different voices on any issue, whatever the issue might be, who are all have equal say for the most part. But that marks us very different than how most of, I would say, the esports industry operates, where it's a very investor driven, commercialized, top down approach.
Yeah, I just speaking from experience, when we were at the NACE convention this summer, it was really refreshing to be in the room. And admittedly, I had never been a part of something like this, because prior to this summer, the only expertise or experience that I had was running it as a student, for about a year. So we were in the Star League, but we weren't really as much of a participant, school at the moment, right? And when we were there, I was like, holy cow, these directors and these people are incredibly passionate about NACE itself, right? Because when you get in the room with a lot of those people, and it's easy to, I think the one we were looking at was, we were looking at some of the bylaws and some of the operating procedures for like the upcoming year and stuff. And the amount of different perspectives and ideas and like clarifications that people were asking for was awesome to see, because I think at the end of the day, that just makes the organization better. And I think that's very much present with NACE.
It was refreshing as time director, just be in that experience and have that opportunity, to know that I'm not alone. When I'm often talking to, and I've said this before on this podcast, 10 years ago, this job didn't exist. So having that full resources from, or other opportunities from, incredible.
Yeah, you mentioned our mentorship program. That was established very purposely, right? So I still think today we talk to nearly every institution who's starting an esports program, right? Whether they join or not, whether they actually start a program or not, doesn't really matter so much to us. We just want them to have the information, at least a solid foundation to build everything else off of. And we share that with literally anyone. You don't have to be a member. We don't charge for anything. We just share it. And it comes from our member schools that we built through surveys, through guides. Schools have offered their own like policies and programming, so we can give like real examples. But the mentorship program, so that's all great and fantastic. But what we discovered is, after that connection, people went off on their own, and we weren't purposely connecting back with them. That was a mistake. Let me be very clear. That's a mistake, and that's a mistake that exists pretty much across higher ed esports still. But the mentorship program was very purposeful in that we wanted that connection to continue for long as possible. And the way that we saw to do that was, we've got some very experienced administrators who've basically been with us in the trenches building this thing as we're flying. And we have every year so many more new schools, brand new coaches, brand new directors with various experiences and education in esports, from never having been in the gaming space ever to like, hey, I was a former pro coach, right? Like everything in between as well, to where we can now purposefully connect this new administrator who might just be new to NACE, and maybe that's enough, to a very experienced administrator, whether it's coach or director, just to make sure that you very clearly have a direct contact that we engage with, right? We help set up meetings, we give topics of discussion. All of that is just to facilitate communication so that there is that mentorship path. And this is the second year we've been running this program. It's now twice as big as it was last year. I think we're off the top of my head, I think we're around like 62 mentors, right. and I think around the same, it's one-to-one basis, so that number of mentees. And we're always expanding it, but I think it's been very helpful. I don't think it's the silver bullet that solves all problems, but I think it's a step in the right direction that we're taking, at least.
Sure. And coming back on that growth conversation, as an administrator for NACE, how does that feel knowing that this program has loaded popularity in the last?
Well, I'm thankful to be employed. If you're asking Michael Brooks, like, personally, yeah, it's great that I'm employed, but no, I think it says what. So many people don't know this, and maybe I'll get together and write like a brief chapter in some book explaining how the concept of varsity esports really came into reality. In 2016, when NACE formed, there were only 6 schools, 6 college and universities in North America that had a varsity esports program.
Who are those 6?
So Robert Morris was one. That they're no longer an institution. They were bought up by Roosevelt. I'm getting distracted. So Robert Morris, Maryville, we had Midland, we had Jamestown University, Kansas Wesleyan was another one, and I'm forgetting the 6th.
We gave you a pop quiz. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm forgetting the 6th, but I think
he's
I got
a professor
myself
at
distracted.
the end of the day. So.
And then shortly after we formed, by the way, UCI then announced. So for anyone's timeline, who's an old soul like me in the esports world, but the way we came together, this is incredible. Robert Morris started 2 years prior to NACE forming. They were the first school to have a varsity esports program. So like, if everyone remembers the news back then, like, schools giving out scholarships for gaming, right? Like, it was crazy. It was like it was the only one, and it got crazy amount of press. That is why some of the other schools started it. But this is the insane part. Until we intentionally brought them together to start discussing, like, what are you doing? What is this thing? What do you expect for it to do? And where do you hope it goes? None of these schools actually talk to each other. Only 6 in the whole continent that are doing somewhat similar things. You would think that they would, like, talk to each other, discuss, plan,
on each other a little bit,
share best practices. Zero communication. They saw it on the news and they developed it in silos. But as we got together, because it was about a year before we actually formed of these meetings, discussions, conference calls, we discovered that there is a common end goal here, which is they think this is the future for how students are going to want to compete and engage with their institution, similar to how athletics is today. And no one was saying athletics is going away. No. Right. This is just another thing that seems really powerful and of interest to students. And that was where their vision was, but they had no way to do that individually. And over that period of time, they came together and said, you know what, we need to organize. And historically, the way to do that has been by forming these associations, whether it's the NCAA, the NAI, the NJCA, right? All these organizations, if you go back to their very beginning, were formed by the schools operating in that space, saying we need to collectively organize to pool our intelligence, pool our resources, and build something that matters at the end of the day. And that was the formation of NACE. So long explanation for a very short question, I think, and I tend to do that, so pre-apologies. But that growth that we've been seeing, I think, is the affirmation that we're looking for on a pretty much daily basis, that what we felt was there is in actuality healthy and vibrant and just really pushing the needle forward. We weren't wrong, because at that point in time, it was an educated guess, but there was no research or studies or anything backing up what we were saying.
And honestly, back then, obviously, when I was running the program and stuff for the year that I did, there were some and obviously NACE was really starting to pick up there, but with only around the 40 or 50, I think, like you mentioned earlier, we still really were like, okay, what's going to pick up this overall thing of collegiate esports, right? Because there was initially conversations, like what happens when the NCAA gets a hold of it? What happens with this is before NIL deals and all that fun stuff. But there was a conversation around that. Nobody really knew. There were all these different tournaments and leagues, but we didn't really know who was going to grab that collegiate sports market. And I think now it's safe to say that NACE has done that, right? And did you ever, when you started this, right, you had that educated guess, and you guys all believed in it, obviously, right? But did you ever think that it would grow to be what it is now with a conference like we had in Indianapolis and just all these things, great work that it's doing now? Did you ever think that it was going to come to this large of a scale?
That is good question. If I'm being very honest, I hoped.
Sure.
But I couldn't really envision exactly what that would look like, right? So I hoped you'll see an esports program in every single college and university one day. If you'd asked me early on, like, what's your timeline? Couldn't tell you. I had no idea. I knew it took like 4 years to get to 6. So, okay, that's a terrible growth rate, by the way. But, in higher education, things move slow. That would be understandable. But yeah, I mean, like the whole higher education space in esports has really gone through some real ups and downs, and it's crazy how fast it moves. So, like, I think you mentioned 2019, right?
Yeah.
Well, 2019, 2020 were gangbuster years for esports, not particularly driven by the schools themselves, although we were seeing rapid growth there as well. It was the flood of outside money, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not here to pick on other groups, but I will give you real examples, and you and your audience can have their own thoughts. So we saw Play VS come into the space with their deal with the National Federation of High Schools, NFHS, right?
Right.
We saw them raise over $100 million in their fundraising rounds. We saw groups like, oh my gosh, there's a UGC, EGF form. Like, at that point in time, that was scary for me and I think our leadership, right? Because we're a nonprofit. We only grow off of what we're able to build and what our members contribute, like any other nonprofit association. So this was, crazy that the NCAA has had like 80 years to grow, basically, in its own little silo, in its own little world. NEI, same thing. But because of the success of those organizations, especially the NCAA, a lot of people looked at like, well, this is a chance that I can own the gaming version of the NCAA. Of course, let me write a check. And a lot of people, to be frank, wrote checks without doing any due diligence, right? Just throwing money, which, in the investor space, we call dumb money. That happened everywhere. So you saw a lot of these companies to come out of nowhere, not really a care for what schools want, right? Like, to this day, it is rare that if an organization is working in the higher ed space, that they even have a board or an advisory board at the minimum made up of the actual schools that they're meant to serve. That is insane to me, but that is rare today still. Like, NACE and maybe like 1 or 2 other groups actually has some way for institutions to actually have a finger on the pulse and a hand on the wheel, so to speak, right?
I think NACE is very unique.
But that was the reality that we were seeing at that time. So yeah, I 100, I was there with you. Like, what group's gonna win, right? You got the talk of the NCAA, you've got all these for-profit groups, and you have little old NACE kind of just trucking along, doing its thing, keeping its nose to the grindstone.
And I mean, it was a non-negotiable, right? I mean, we talked about this in previous episodes where we talked about schools and their willingness or unwillingness to bring in esports into their offerings for their students, right? And Collegiate Esports was turning into a non-negotiable, right? Eventually, every school is going to adopt it, or the vast majority of schools are going to adopt it. So that's why I was so interested to see who came out of it, because this very obviously wasn't going to be something that was a 3 or 4 year thing, and then it ends up in a book, and we're like, that was a cool little span of time. This is very much something that's here to stay, right? Whether your organization chooses to acknowledge it or not, right?
100% agreed here.
We're working.
Well, if it's not esports, unless something breaks.
Right. Right. All right.
All right, I think we're back. It's amazing how quickly stuff pops in and disappears from my head, because in that 1 minute span where we had to switch to Zoom meetings, I forgot all what we were talking about.
We're talking about the growth of.
There we go. That's
and,
right.
And how Michael feels.
Yeah. We were talking about like in 2019, 2020, other groups, the NCA, and I named a few other groups as well that were around. Some are still around today in various capacities. Most are shadows of their former self because investor dollars have dried up, and that was the business model. Apparently, was just take people's money and spend it without building something real. Which I think was a travesty.
Are you surprised that more college sports organizations haven't tried to get a reach or a deeper reach in esports?
Well, they absolutely are, just in different ways. So last week we announced our partnership with the Big East Conference.
I did see that. That was exciting.
Yeah. So they absolutely are. I think they see the same thing. Esports is here to stay. Mm-hmm. It's growing. Students are interested, and it opens new avenues for institutions as well. Intentionally for us, our goal is to work with as many different groups as possible. But importantly, bring them together, mm-hmm. right? What's the plan? How do we help each other? Where does everyone fit? That is the mantra of NACE, if you will, right? We've never intentionally, or even in our thoughts or plans, try to push anyone out. If we see someone is doing something well and right and has a valuable place, my immediate thoughts and the thoughts of our leadership is great. How do they come in and do better together?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has drawn me to NACE specifically, because it's such a need, is, and I'll ask you to kind of go into it a little bit, but the varying levels of competition and support depending on where a school is at with their program, right? Because when you think about, just in traditional sports, right? Every single collegiate sports, they have, a head coach, they've got an athletic director, they've got the staff to support it, right? To be involved with the NCAA or whatever governing body they're a part of, to schedule things and do that fun stuff. So now with Collegiate Esports, we're obviously seeing an increase in full-time staff and dedicated staff, but we still have a lot of organizations that are run by students or run by, let's say, a faculty member that has jumped on board because they're passionate and stuff. What are some of the varying degrees of competition and support in NACE? Because that was one of the things that really I didn't quite understand about NACE. I knew it was there, but I really didn't fully grasp it until we were at the conference. And I think it's so valuable given where esports in college is right now.
And I don't blame you for, at that point, being unaware. There is so much that we do that is very much behind the scenes. Like it's directly working with our coaches and directors in mass, right? But that's not what the public cares about. That's not something that impacts them. It's not something that is entertaining for them, but it's essential, right? You have to have a strong foundation or everything else is built on sand. It'll fall apart. Just give it time. And that is a lot of the work that we do. So when we, for example, student eligibility, right? We were the first, and we're still today the only organization that cares if a person on your team is actually a student at your school. Insanity to me.
As a faculty member, I'm on your side. I love it. Right. I get it.
Well, so like we check, right? We check. We have ITCs. That's acronym. That's an intent to compete, which does a few things actually. One, this student is a full-time student at your institution. Great, we can confirm that. 2, we understand what esport they're playing at. 3, we understand how long they're going to play up to a full academic year at the institution, right? Those are to prevent and provide transparency to things that we still see today, but especially outside of NACE, students jumping around rosters in the same semester, right? They transfer one school, go to another school, immediately playing. that I have no issue with student transferring, right? But I think that
Right.
there should be a structure and a process to it so that it's not cloak and dagger stuff through Twitter DMs, I'm sorry, now X, or Discord DMs, or God forbid, in-game messaging, right? Like there's so much room for abuse there that does happen. I think we all are very cognizant of this. Like there are bad actors in the space. I think they're the minority for sure, but we have to recognize that they exist. So shining a spotlight on this process, making sure that everyone has visibility into everyone's actions here, is something that I think sets NACE apart to provide security for our schools, but also our students. As part of our intent to compete process, right? It outlines that the school has obligations to these students as well, and it puts a neutral third party, that is NACE, in a position to balance between the two, so that it's not this as much, right? Like things can always improve, and they absolutely will, but it's not so much the student against the school. There's a neutral arbitrator, and they're saying like, okay, wait, this is what you promised, and this is what you promised. Does someone fall off on either of those? Our eligibility certificate is also to make sure that students are academically eligible to play. It is a lot less than we see in traditional athletics, right? Like what we're looking at is to make sure, based upon the school's individual academic participation policies, that they're upholding to their own standards, and that is what we're confirming. We do have some publishers who require different minimum GPA requirements, and we do track on those. Blizzard is an example of that. But these are some very basic things in my mind that we are doing to different levels. But the fact is that we're doing something, which is fairly unique, unfortunately, in this space.
And to that end, I think it should be in that space, right? I mean, I think from my perspective, obviously as a faculty member, right, I'm going to argue all day that the academic side of things are just as important, right? But it's to me, it's such a good feeling to know that NACE is doing something about that, because it's so easy, given where collegiate esports was and could still be considered to be today, for those things to happen and be perfectly accepted. And I'm a firm believer that, although they come, to play video games and do these things, I think we have to pay attention to that bigger picture. And it's really reinvigorating to see that there is a focus on that, because it would have been easy for whatever organization that kind of popped into that space and filled the role that NACE is currently filling to not worry about that, right? You don't necessarily have to. There's no governing body that's telling you have to do those things like there is with the NCAA and traditional athletics. And so that's a key component that could have been overlooked, certainly.
Absolutely. I stress big time to my players importance of your school's first. And now with NACE, I have that backing kind of support myself and my. You're not going to class. You're not doing well in your class. You're not gonna be able to play. Nice little my organization. I'm sure dozens of others.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say we talked about this a little bit, but the simple fact that you're not alone, it's a little thing. Like we're all adults. Well, it is a little thing, but if you see someone do something, it is so much easier for you to do it as well, because it's possible. And esports has a big problem that we're all remote. It's online for the most part, right? We do have our grand finals, we have our convention. Those are great, but those are a few times a year. It is very much to feel like you're on your own world, and like if you don't do it, you personally don't do it, it doesn't happen, and you get exhausted, right? But seeing other people doing that, having them lend you a helping hand and pulling you up, I think that's something special about NACE. I know other organizations do the same thing, and that's wonderful as well. But it's something that I'm proud of, and it's entirely led by our members, right? Student eligibility, I was talking about that. We focus on that because it's important to our schools. They told us it's important to them. From a business perspective, makes zero sense. Why would we care?
Yeah.
Right? but because our directives come from our members, it's now important to us.
Right, exactly. I mean, it would have been just so easy for it to fall into, if it wasn't member-led and driven and things like that, to just fall into this
back room.
Zero accountability, just victory is the only thing that matters, and all those fun things associated with that. I do have a question for you. I've got two questions, and I'll give you them at the same time so you can think of the other one because it might be difficult. But from your experiences with NACE, what would be, well, NACE and just your work in the collegiate sports atmosphere in general, what do you think is like the most rewarding thing for you? Because obviously the work that you do at NACE and just in general is incredibly demanding, right? Whether that's schedule, time, just your mental bandwidth, all those things. So there's got to be something that you're like, this is good, right? Like this is what gets me up in the morning. What would that be? And then what are some challenges that you face? And you don't have to get into specifics or anything like that, but what are some things that you found difficult over the years in building this program?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and you're being greedy, by the way, asking two questions.
I know.
This is
And we're not paying you to be here. It's just what a terrible podcast.
Don't worry, nobody pays me.
It's still
non-profit life.
Yeah, right.
So look, I'll start with saying the things that I'm that are impactful for me. If you're asking Michael Brooks as a person and not the executive director, there's two different answers, as we all wear multiple hats.
Right.
For me personally, this is an opportunity to do something that I'm going to use the word legacy, but I don't think I quite mean that word. I think it's just the closest in my mind that fits. It's a chance for me, and not just me, it's like everyone who's involved, and thankfully this tribe is growing bigger every day, to build something that, if we do it right, will outlive us. It's funny. I was talking to one of our member schools, Dr. Chris Haskell from Boise State today. I'll be transparent. No agenda or anything. He's just a good guy, and he likes to check in on people. And I'm on his Rolodex, I guess his call is. And I occasionally will talk to him, and that's great because I love those engagements. It gives me a chance to see what's happening at the ground level that because of my position, I don't get the chance to see more often than not. Like, it has to be brought to my attention just because I'm not there physically with you. I was talking to him, and I hope he doesn't mind I'm sharing this, but like he mentioned to me, like, you know what? One day I hope there's a Hall of Fame after I'm long dead and buried in the ground, because that means that everything I've sacrificed today is worth it. He told me this.
Yeah.
But I fundamentally agree, right? Like, how often in history do you have a chance to be part of something in a real way, a way that people will remember, that will change and impact the lives of, if we do this right, generations of young men and women for the future, right? Like that does not escape me. It's a chance to do real good. It's a chance to do things differently and hopefully better. And I come out of traditional athletics, right? Like in higher education, especially, there's so much that we do because it's how we did it, right? Not because it's the best way, not because certainly not because it's the right way. It's just like, that is just how it is, almost like it's written in stone. And everyone recognizes that. It's crazy. Like, we all recognize, like, this could be done better, and just the inability to move it just because it's tradition and that's the way it is, and you just shoulder that weight and move forward. That's all meaningful for me. From the executive director hat, which also agrees personally with Michael Brooks, right? Like, look how many students we're putting through school. Like, with it, from NACE itself and to our member institutions, I think our last survey, we're like at $24 million a year in tuition support, financial aid, and scholarships going out specifically for esports. That's an insane amount of students that are getting support that wouldn't exist otherwise.
If we had a live audience right now, they would be clapping, just so we're clear.
That's impressive.
Like, you want to talk about like a real impact? I am certain, we haven't done any studies yet, but like I feel really safe in saying that we could probably find just one person who would not have gone to college
I got one
without esports.
Right outside in the lab. He specifically said if it weren't for sports, he probably wouldn't have.
So one, right now, I'm hoping there's more because that is a great story. But even one, that is an actual difference in someone's life. Like, their future has been unarguably absolutely changed to a different direction for what I hope is a positive. And now, higher education hat, we all know that higher education is a pathway for success, right? It's a higher household income, it's stability in your lives, it's greater statistically family success, right? Like there's all these winning metrics
Yep.
where higher education seems to be that linchpin that holds all that together. And now we're bringing people to that, which they naturally may or may not have gone. That is fantastic. And the studies are going on right now, because I do come from the athletics world, I've seen it, right? Graduating as a freshman, starting as a true freshman, in 4 years at the same institution, there's two student population groups that have the most success. The first one is those in the Greek system, so fraternities and sororities, right? Starting as a freshman, graduating as a senior from the same institution on the ideal track for graduation. The other population is student athletes. What do both groups have? Well, they have infrastructure and they have campus support and belonging, right? They come in as part, and very, very intentionally, right? In some bad ways, as we all know the bad examples, but there's many more positive stories of I have a family, I have a network, I have a friend group, I have resources to make sure I succeed, whether you're a student athlete or in the Greek system, right? There's a lot of similarities behind structure and resources to ensure your success. Now with esports, we're bringing people who the Greek system might not have been a good fit for them. Maybe that I was not part of the Greek system. I could not imagine myself being part of that system because it's just not me. It's not, doesn't speak to me, right? Athletics, I like to think I was a great athlete up until a certain point where everyone got a lot bigger and stronger than me.
Felt that.
I missed
felt
the
that.
memo, right? Like around me is like transition from junior year of high school to senior year of high school, where like everyone, I guess, agreed to add a few inches of height and then like another 20 pounds of muscle. I didn't get that message. No one texted me. No one let me know about that. I really wish they would have. But athletics, was not an avenue for me in college. But gaming has been around my life since I was a kid, right? Since like the first Super Nintendo was like rolling around.
Oh yeah.
So now we're bringing in people who wouldn't have naturally been part of these two different groups that are super successful, making sure students graduate successfully. But we're still giving them that structure. We're still giving them that sense of belonging, community, friendship that we know makes a real difference. So there's just a lot of wins across the board. That doesn't take away from any of the challenges, which was the second part of your question, right? So what are the challenges? Well, there are a lot.
Sure.
I think we all know this, right? Funding is a big problem. Not just for NACE, right? Like let's devolve that down to our base components, which for us is our schools. Every single one of our schools needs more funding. Maybe there's a rare exception out there. I've not had someone tell me that. No, we're good. No one said that to me yet.
Right.
But staffing, you mentioned this before, that is a real pain point. And I'll give you an example, right? You mentioned like one coach, not even a director, right? So maybe not even access to that level of support, but a coach, a head coach who's running 5 or 6 different teams. I think I'm underestimating what some coaches are doing.
Yeah.
Seeing their student population in their esports program double from one year to the next, and yet the amount of funding they get in their budget remaining stagnant, right? Like in what world would that be considered normal, except for esports? And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I do have an experience in higher education for a little over 12 years before esports, is that there's a vocabulary in esports, not esports, sorry, in higher ed, in administration. Knowing what a person needs and how to frame it so that you can get what you need is something that's taught over time, right? And it's taught by like a lot of failures. Like, and when you look at who our coaches and directors are, it's a lot of young folk, right? It's like this is their first real career. They're fresh out of college.
Yeah.
No school teaches you how to talk with your administrative hat on. And in a normal industry, you would come in at an entry level point and you'd have people above you who hopefully would mentor you along, show you the ropes, bring you in, guide you up, right? That's what we all hope. We know it doesn't always happen, but that's the hope. And yet in esports, Brand, you're right out of college. Great. You're now running this esports program. Here's your budget to go build the space, have fun. And then not in every school, and it's getting a lot better, by the way, of integrating esports into other departments on campus. But historically, it's like, hey, you're you're now on an island. We hired you. Here's your budget. Boom. There you go.
Yeah.
Don't bother me. So funding's a big issue. Working with publishers is kind of a mixed bag. It's somewhat positive, somewhat negative. It really depends on the subject matter, but it is true that we have to recognize that there is this overarching entity that we'll call publishers who really has an incredibly tight grip, or could have if they wanted to, on what you are able or not able to do, right? And that is wildly different than any other business I can think of, where you're like reliant upon this third party granting you the ability to work. Is really what we're referring to. That's a universal issue. Now, I would say nearly all the publishers that are out there have been great to work with, and we are continually working with them. Like, we're partners, we're long-term partners in many cases. Year over year over year, we've been working with publishers. Great turnaround. We're starting to see publishers actually provide financial support because they start starting to see the value, and I think help better define those values, the powers that be in their own offices. So there's a lot of wins there, but it is a scary factor, right? Like, what do you do if a new CEO comes in and just hates the idea that gaming is occurring in colleges, right? Which would be a little weird in this case. But let's say that's the case, right? There's nothing preventing a publisher from saying, boom, no school's allowed to touch this game anymore. And what do? Right? You're kind of stuck. That was the fear with I'm not picking on PlayVS, but this was like the instance where PlayVS was getting exclusivity contract with publishers, and then those letters went out. It's trying to shut down all these volunteer-led high school groups, right? Like that very much spoke to that fear. And then of course you have you have our schools, which are very much diverse, I would say, to be as short as possible in terms of what their goals are. Why are you even in the esports world? What does your institution care about? I mean, some of it is student recruitment and retention. Some of it is academic programming. Some of it is pure marketing for the institution. Some of them don't know why they're in esports, except for they saw their peers, their competitors, right, that they were in terms of student recruitment, all that, have esports programs. So they're like, all right, I guess we have to as well. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and I'm sure I'm missing 1,000,001 things in terms of problems. The good thing is that our problems are getting less and less each year, and some of these are actually turning into real opportunities.
Yeah. Well, and talking about, speaking of the next year and over the years, I know we're getting kind of towards the end of the podcast time here, but what's next for NACE? And I know you don't have to give up any big secrets or anything like that, but for your upcoming academic year, what are some things that you have, goals like that, and just what are you looking to do?
Sure. So what are we? Oh my gosh, I have so many ideas and dreams that our leadership, by the way, squashes pretty quickly. Like, no, let's focus on this is the priority.
Typical.
So yeah, like I think a lot of people initially, and it's a lot better now that like I was one of the few people that was kind of the face of collegiate esports, which I'm sorry. But people had the assumption that I had immense control over everything, which has never been the case. But I get it. You see a handful of people constantly talking about collegiate esports. You think they got more power than they do. But so I say that my own vision and goals can sometimes be mitigated or redirected based upon what membership tells me, and that happens frequently, actually. But for me, like, I always think consolidation is coming. It's happening right now. As of this week, right? If I look across the collegiate esports landscape, there's only one organization that hasn't approached us in the last 6 months, about trying to figure out how to partner with us, how to figure out and merge with us, or us just absorbing them, right? Which says a lot of things. You can unpack that in your own mind, if you will. But like for me, we're doing something right when everyone's approaching us and not the other way around. It says that they see something of value in what we're doing, which I think speaks to the strength of our members. That's kind of the first thing that's happening. We're going to have more announcements coming out with athletic conferences. That's not going away. That's just going to keep skyrocketing. We're in 1,000,001 conversations on that front, negotiations. There's lawyers get involved at some point there, and that's fine. And what we're doing with publishers is expanding as well. We implemented last year some newer esports things that maybe some people. It's funny, like esports isn't a sport. Well, on the flip side, we have people saying like that's not an esport, which I find immensely amusing, right? And then it's a headache later on, but that's later. But like we implemented a partnership with chess.com. We are their official collegiate chess league. Same thing with NASCAR and iRacing. And a lot of questions when we first announced that, like, why? That's not an esport. Well, no one plays that. No one's gonna be interested. Well, look, if I look at NASCAR right now, from last season to this season, we added 112 new drivers.
Yeah.
It is one of the fastest growing esports we have, and we consolidate most of the space. So we have a vision across almost the entirety of our esports. What do you mean no one wants to do it?
If
right?
there's one thing I've learned throughout video gaming, in life in general, but especially in the collegiate atmosphere, when somebody says nobody plays that game, they're always wrong. There's always a pretty large group of people who are like vying for the opportunity to play at a competitive level or to just have some form of healthy competition.
Yeah.
There's people in every single game. It's so awesome to see.
Yeah. So look, we're going to keep expanding. We're going to keep on evangelizing to the powers that be, to the people that can influence decisions on the campus level, to really, one, to get involved in esports, but two, to also grow it. We're going to continue providing collective advantages to our schools in terms of providing competition at different levels. So regardless of where your institution is at, you have a home in NACE. Whether you've got a premier level team which you think is the best in the best, well, great, here's varsity premier, go and prove it. If you're looking for just a place that is structured fundamentally to have consistent concurrent competition with teams that are of a balanced skill level, great, we have varsity premier. If you're a club and you don't have support of your administrations, well, that's why we have the open divisions, right? Like we intentionally, very intentionally, over a long period of time, developed places that will work for anyone and everyone. And that was the whole point of NACE just doesn't want to be the place for varsity competition. We want to be the home for varsity programs, period. More than just competition, but obviously competition is an aspect that we focus on quite heavily. So that's probably a poor answer to a simple question.
Oh, it's great.
But, there's a lot to unpack with that.
For sure. And let's say we have a listener who's listening and hearing about NACE for the first time, and maybe they sparked their interest. What would you say to them about joining NACE or involved?
Sure. So regardless if you're a student in a varsity program, you're a student within a club, you're a student without a home at all, right? There is a place for you to compete. There's a place for you to organize. If you want to help kind of elevate where your esports program is or is not on campus, best way is to go to our website, naceesports.org, and just reach out to us, right? We've got 1,000,001 documents laying out step by step how to talk to administrators, how to grow a program, what the current level of an average esports program looks like across the board right now, so you have something to compare against. We'll share all that. In fact, we'll even jump on a call and we'll walk you through everything as much as you want, as many times as you want. Again, not a smart business decision, but important to us to invest as much time as possible to make sure each individual school is as successful as we can help them to be. The second component, if you're just looking for competition and you want a great place to do that with some of the largest prize pools that exist in collegiate esports, check out nsl.leaguespot.gg, right? Sign up for competition. Our open competition is entirely free. We do not charge anything there. There's only an opportunity to compete against some of the best students and teams in the country. And if you're part of a varsity program that isn't a member of NACE, reach out to us, right? We're happy to talk. It used to be we're almost certain we'd manage to talk to every varsity esports program that exists. Really easy when there's only 6, by the way.
Yeah.
But the space is growing so fast that we're playing catch up 99% of the time. When communication happens between NACE and a school, it's the school that reaches out to us first. And with so many new people coming into the space, it's not unusual. In some ways, unusual, but it happens that a person doesn't know who exists in the space, right? Like, where do I go for competition? Like, they just don't know, and it happens. So we're always happy to share about that. And by the way, when we talk about this, we don't just talk about NACE. We do also point, if we think there might be a better fit for a specific reason, yeah, we'll call out, there's the NACC, right?
Yeah.
There's the ECAC, if you're that traditional athletic part is so important to your administrators may have, right? There's a lot of groups we'll point you to, and I know we're out of time, but I'll mention this, like, it's not, we're not super competitive, and they aren't really with us, with a lot of other groups. Like, we actually coordinate a lot on the back end with existing collegiate esports groups, from fundamental things like, what are the rules to Rocket League, right?
Yeah.
Like having some common, like, yes, this is how Rocket League should be played in higher education, to like us establishing the semester model for competition that's now pretty much adopted across the board. Yeah, there was a lot of communication on that when we started that model.
All comes back to that collaboration esports.
Very, very much so. Yeah. Now, like, does that mean that there isn't like a sense of like, like we won this contract, or like, hey, we've got these schools, and as they switched over from you to us, like, absolutely. But I think that's good competition, right?
Yeah.
Like, someone did better than us. We're going to look at what they did, and we're going to try to one up them immediately, as soon as possible. And that makes the whole space better.
Absolutely.
I love that. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Michael, thank you so much for your time, your expertise on this podcast, but more specifically, or more broadly, I guess, your overall work and dedication to the collegiate esports space. Before we end, where can people find you?
So if you're on Twitter, now known as X, which
we still make the mistake. I call it Twitter.
I will have to get used to that at some point in time. Yeah, you can reach out to me. It's just Esports Mike. I'm not on social media too much. I am reading, unfortunately, as we all know, with social media, but I don't tweet as much. But I do see all my messages. Best way actually is just to go to our Discord. Or the NACE Star League Discord. We have two different Discords for two different types of conversations. They can go to our website, nacesports.org. All of our contact information, believe it or not, is publicly available. My cell phone number is out there too.
Yeah.
Like, anyone can reach out to me at any point in time. That may have been an incredibly dumb decision, but it is out there because the intent is that we should be accessible.
Exactly.
And we very much are.
Speaks to the accessibility of the collegiate esports landscape. Well, thank you again for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for episode 4. We will certainly post all of the links to Michael's great work and NACE and all of those things in the link in the description below, and we will see you guys next week. Thanks.
Thank you very much.